Hi, I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings, and today I am up at the Northern Michigan Garden, and we're going to be talking about microclimates. In addition to talking about microclimates, we're going to go ahead and walk through the gardens and see what's still blooming, what still looks nice. There's a lot of annuals that are still in their prime, or maybe not in their prime, but are looking quite well for this late in the season. Typically in Michigan, we could get a frost anywhere from, mid-September to usually beginning to mid-October is fairly typical for when we would see frosts here in this area. But up here at the Northern Michigan Garden, we still have not gotten a frost, which is amazing for this late in the season. So we're going to talk about microclimates. There's a lot of different elements that go into microclimates. There's a lot of different microclimates in general. And we're going to talk about how, where I'm located here in Northern Michigan, we are set kind of in a very nice little microclimate. So let's go ahead and talk microclimates. So there is local microclimates, which would include water in your area, hillsides, and even vegetation. There's urban microclimates, which would be if you're located in a big city or in a city where you're getting heat and such reflecting off of buildings. That's creating usually a warm microclimate. Plant influence also creates microclimates. So if you have trees in your garden or different shrubbery or even just your perennials and annuals, that can create microclimates within your garden. There's geological microclimates, which would be like mountains, valleys, hillsides, and slopes. That too can create just different areas and different growing conditions in your garden. So some of the things that can affect microclimates, it can be wind, it can be rain, it can be temperature, and it can be humidity. So let's take a little bit closer look at some of these elements and what they do to a microclimate. So the first thing we're going to talk about is temperature. So we all know that heat rises. So some of your plants that are more sensitive, or plants that can't handle as much cold, if you have the ability, or if your garden is such that you have higher or lower areas in your garden, I would recommend planting more your sensitive plants at the top or the highest points in your garden. Those are going to be areas where they're going to get more heat, and realistically they would do better. In lower areas of your garden, those are always little cold pockets typically, where the frost will settle in, where the cold just sinks and falls into place. And those would be areas of your garden where you'd want to plant your plants that can handle cooler temperatures. Light also is a factor in microclimates. So you have shady areas. Obviously, shady areas are areas that are going to stay a little bit cooler. But typically as well, a shady area in your garden is going to also hold more humidity or more moisture. So plants that are moisture loving and can handle more shade obviously are going to do better in those cooler, shadier areas in your garden. And then you've got those plants that are drought tolerant. They're the plants that are going to want to be in those warmer microclimates in your garden, where they're getting the full sun, where they're, able to withstand if, your full sun area don't always hold the moisture as well. So plants that can withstand not holding as much moisture, maybe even plants that can handle wind, because wind also is a factor, and that can dry up areas in your garden as well. Humidity is also very important, or is a factor in microclimates. So if you are located near a lake, a stream, a pond, any body of water that has some significant size to it, that is going to let off humidity into your area. Humidity then traps the infrared heat from the sun, creating a warmer area in your garden. So that's what is going to really be something we're going to talk about with the gardens up here at the Northern Michigan Garden. Because we are located near a lake, it is creating more of that humidity feel, or holding more moisture, trapping in the infrared heat from the sun and creating a warmer pocket, as to why our annuals, perennials, and shrubs are still doing pretty good this late in the season. Also, air circulation is a factor. So think about it when in the spring you hear about frosts are coming, and you either have all your plants planted and you're like, oh no, the frost's coming, what do I need to do? Or you hear about like your farmers in the area that have their crops that have been planted, or your fruit farmers that the buds on the trees are there. there's some things that they do to help try to protect their crops from those warm temperatures. So one of the things that we see in this area is we'll see huge semis that are just loaded with huge fans that will get brought out into those apple orchards or those cherry orchards, and they'll turn those fans on nights where frost is being predicted. They want to create air movement, because if you have a still night, especially a night with no cloud cover, that's when the frost is more apt to settle in. So on those cold nights when there's no clouds, they will set these fans up and get them running all night long to create air movement. So that way that cold does not settle on their flowers or the buds that are waiting to, continue to grow through the summer. Because if the frost hits those buds or flowers on those fruit trees, that means that there's not going to be as good of a fruit crop that year. So it's important that those farmers are out there getting that air moving. So we will also do that in our outdoor garden area. If we have some of our perennials and such outside and we hear the frost is coming, we will set our fans out there as well to keep that air moving. Another thing that we'll do is we'll turn the sprinklers on. So every 15 minutes, every half hour or so, depending on what we think we need to do, we'll turn those sprinklers on for a minute or two just to kind of get those plants coated in water. We know that sometimes that water is going to freeze on that plant, but by doing so, that's creating an insulation on that plant so that it doesn't get nipped by that frost. It is the craziest thing to see when we get there in the morning and the plants are frozen with a water film, but as the day goes on and the sun comes up and that frozen water melts off the plants, they essentially look unharmed by the frost of that day. We know that cold air sinks or falls as well, so you'll often see that low areas in your garden are going to be the ones that are first affected by the frost if it is a frosty night. So another thing you can do is, if it's calling for frost and you're like, what can I do to help protect my plants, is you can go out in the garden with a blanket, a sheet, some sort of a fabric type of covering that you can place over top of your plants. By putting that fabric or that sheet or that blanket or whatever over your plants, that's going to help insulate them and keep them just hopefully warm enough that they don't get nipped by the frost. We'll do this a lot of times with our hostas, because hostas, once they've been nipped by that cold frost, they just don't look as good for the rest of the year. One thing though you do not want to use if you are trying to protect your plants from the cold is placing plastic of any sort on them. So we never recommend putting a plastic tarp or plastic sheeting or anything over your plants, because essentially by putting plastic over those plants, it's going to make them colder, and you're going to do exactly opposite of what you're trying to do to keep your plants to withstand that cold spell. You also need to think about the wind, so especially the winter winds. And as we are coming into winter now, that is something to keep in mind. Now, we really aren't doing a lot of planting at this point in the season. We probably could get by with maybe some shrubs or trees yet, because the ground temperatures are still fairly warm, but we are starting to get a little bit cooler here for nighttime temperatures. So for us here in zone 6A, I kind of say we're probably at the end of our planting season for most of the plants. But when planting your garden, you do need to keep the winter winds in mind. So if you are in an area where you're going to get a lot of that cold breeze blowing, now this is probably more so for those of us here in the north, you want to make sure that you're planting your more cold tolerant plants in an area that is going to be affected by those winter winds. So if you have so let's say you're in zone 6A and you have an area that you just know is totally something that's going to get whipped by the winter winds, I would recommend probably making sure that my plant is hardy for sure down to zone 5 and maybe even zone 4 if it's an area that could be a little risky from extra cold or wind. If you have an area that's more protected in your garden and you're a zone 7 or a zone 6A, go ahead and plant your zone 6 perennials or shrubs there, and they should be just fine. But always try to maybe be a little bit more proactive with choosing plants that are extra hardy if you are planting them in either one of those low-lying, cold settling areas in your garden, or in an area where you could get a lot of winter winds. So hopefully this kind of helped you learn a little bit about what microclimates are, what to look for in microclimates. Now we're going to go ahead and walk through the garden and talk about how the microclimate of being by the lake here has affected some of the plants in the northern Michigan garden. So let's go ahead and take a walk through the gardens. So although we're not in a big city, we're very much out in the country here, we're going to talk about like the urban microclimate, meaning like the buildings and how buildings trap in heat in certain areas. This doesn't always have to happen in urban areas. It can happen in anywhere in your garden that is planted right next to the house. So when you're planting next to the house, this would be a microclimate. So typically, if your house, if you heat your house at all, or even if you don't, if you're in the south and don't need to really use a lot of heat, the sun is penetrating heat off the house, creating kind of a warmer microclimate. For us here in Michigan, a lot of times I will plant some of my questionable, if they're going to be hardy or not, plants right up against the house, because as we heat the house, there's heat that's radiating off the house from the heat that's inside of the house, keeping the plants planted right at the base of the house just a little bit warmer than those that are planted out further. So that is something, if there is a plant you just love and want to try it in your garden, try planting it next to your house, because that is going to be more than likely one of the warmer or warmest spots in your garden. So check out these annuals. These are sun patiens. Sun patiens are one of the first annuals to be hit by the frost, and they are still looking pretty darn good for this late in the season. I mean, check out all those beautiful flowers. The other thing, because it's been such a warm season this year, we're seeing a lot of plants reblooming that we would never see rebloom. So these here are the firelight tidbit in the back, and you can see there's a lot of spent blooms there, and those were the first blooms that bloomed in August when they were supposed to. And look at this, all of these new flowers that have emerged, and this is happening off of any new growth. So firelight tidbit is a hydrangea that blooms off of the new growth. But because the plant continues to grow, you know, throughout the summer, it's continuing to put on new growth. And even that late in the season new growth has put on some really beautiful late summer bonus blooms. I love firelight tidbit because it's very compact and only gets about 3 foot tall. So it's kind of the perfect size shrub that you can tuck into perennial gardens. Got the Monarda there, and that's all spent. Monarda blooms midsummer, so I wouldn't anticipate seeing anything blooming on that right now. This here is another microclimate in the garden, and I'm only talking about this because you see that little white thing on the wall? That has something to do with our heating system. And so when that is running, there's warm air that's coming out of that into this area in the garden. So this little space in the garden does tend to be a little bit warmer than other areas as well, because of some of the heat that is coming out through that spout there in the house. Plants that are planted next to driveways or cement patios, or anything, you know, like the ground here, driveways, that type of thing. Those two are going to be plants that may act just a little different than plants that are planted out in the garden. And that's because your driveways, your cement, that all, you know, absorbs the sun, the heat from the sun, and then that heat is radiating off onto these plants. So that in a lot of situations would be where you may want to plant some plants that are more drought tolerant in these type of spaces, because they could be experiencing excess heat from the drives that they are planted next to. Making our way down, you can see it's definitely fall here with a beautiful fall color. I would say we're just a little bit past peak at this point. But man, the trees in this area have done just gorgeous color shows this fall. How about where you're at? I would love to know, like, what state do you live in, and did you guys have just a fabulous fall show of color? As we're making our way down here to the front garden, and you can see in proximity to the lake, it's probably maybe 40-50 foot off the lake here. And This garden here, I think, is what's really showing a lot of annuals still just pushing out some color. We've got Nemesia there just still trying to put on its blooms. And it's, again, the sun patience, and this is what I wanted to show you. The sun patience that are still looking fantastic this late in the season. Now, I mean, you can tell that it's been a little cold because they definitely don't have as many flowers as what they had earlier on, but you're not seeing any of that black foliage. So sun patience, when they get hit, you know it in a heartbeat. Now, you are seeing some darker foliage here on the red, but that's because that one is a darker leafed plant to begin with than what the white is. But they are just really still looking fantastic for this late in the season. Diplodenia. Diplodenia is a full sun, heat, hot, loving annual, and it is still just blooming its little heart out with so many flowers. And you can see too, it's windy here, so the plants that are in this area, they also have to be such that can handle some of the extreme winds that may go on in this area. This little bed here is, it's about done. It's pretty tired, but you can still see there's a little bit of blooms there from hydrangeas. There's a few little hydrangeas that put on some late summer blooms. And this area here is looking all fairly tired. Definitely you can tell that the temperatures have gotten colder and that we are experiencing fall here because the hostas have turned all yellow. And this is the point too where I wish, well, I'm not going to be trimming them, Rod will be, but if it were me, this is where I'd be like, okay, I wish these were trimmed before they got to this nasty yellow stage, because I do not like trimming plants that are all slimy and gross. So typically it's better, in my opinion, to get out there and do some trimming before the plants get slimy and gross. Now, I know there's a lot of beneficial bugs and stuff that live in the debris. So to be honest, do your trimming when it works best for you. We all kind of have our own idea of when we prefer to get our gardens cleaned up. So just do what is best for you. Desert plain grass, also starting to go through dormancy, turning yellow, but I love those plumes as they're just blowing here in the breeze. Look at these annuals. The salvia is looking fantastic. And again, this is because of the microclimate we're in right now. Being there next to that lake, it's keeping these plants going fairly strong for this late in the season. Look at that, beautiful blooms. Just as striking as if it were June right now. Love it. We're going to head on up and check out a few more plants that are still looking pretty good for this time of year. So Rod's getting ready to put our furniture away, so he's down there getting it all sprayed. We have this stuff that we use that he sprays on it, and it kind of bleaches all the algae and stuff off. So he likes to get them all cleaned up so that they're ready for next season when we're ready to take them out of the shed. We've got lavender still in bloom that had kind of slowed down a little bit, but then it started to put on another show of color. So pretty how it blows in the breeze. The hydrangeas did fantastic this year. This is the little lime punch hydrangeas, and you can see they've lost most of their leaves now that it's fall, but look at this fantastic color. I really am impressed with the little lime punch color. I feel like every hydrangea I talk about, I say it's my favorite, but there's a good handful of them for their each unique reason that they are my favorite. And little lime punch is just gorgeous fall color. We've even got the big leaf hydrangeas, the Let's Dance Can-Dos. They too continued to put on flowers here even late in the season. Look at this. It's trying. It wants to put on more shows, but it knows that it's time for it to kind of start to fall asleep. So the microclimate we're in currently is high areas, low areas, the lake, which is giving us the humidity that helps keep everything warmer. The water of the lake being warmer keeps the air around us warmer. So it's just fun to see how different areas of the garden react with all of the various microclimates that are within the garden. Is there any microclimates in your area or in your garden that you are loving that you have, or microclimates in your garden that you wished you didn't have? It can go both directions, that is for sure. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. Thanks for watching. I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings.